Family discovers dad's million-dollar debt after his death. Shoebox in attic holds unexpected solution. Hello, welcome. Leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy this story. When the Thompson family stumbles upon a crushing secret left behind by their late father, they're thrust into a whirlwind of deceit, conspiracy, and a race against time to clear his name. As they unravel the threads of a sinister plot, they'll discover that the truth comes at a price they never imagined paying. In the quaint town of Millbrook, nestled in the heart of Connecticut, the Thompson family gathered at their childhood home on Maple Street. The late autumn air carried a chill that seemed to mirror the somber mood inside the colonial-style house. It had been 2 weeks since Jeffrey Thompson, the family patriarch and a pillar of the community, had unexpectedly passed away from a heart attack at the age of 62. Emma Thompson, the eldest of the 3 Thompson children at 35, stood by the bay window in the living room, her auburn hair tied back in a messy bun. Her green eyes, usually bright and full of life, were clouded with exhaustion and grief. She watched as her younger siblings, Michael and Sarah, argued in hushed tones over a stack of papers on the antique coffee table. "This can't be right," Michael insisted, running a hand through his dark hair, a habit he'd picked up from their father. At 32, he was the spitting image of Jeffrey in his younger years. Dad was meticulous with his finances. There's no way he could have overlooked something this big. Sarah, the youngest at 28, shook her head, her blonde curls bouncing with the movement. "The numbers don't lie, Mike. These statements clearly show a deficit of over $2 million. How could this have happened?" Emma turned from the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "We need to stay calm," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "There has to be an explanation. Dad wouldn't have left us in this situation without a reason." The siblings fell silent as their mother, Diane, entered the room. At 59, Diane Thompson still carried herself with the grace and poise that had first attracted Jeffrey to her nearly 40 years ago. But now, her blue eyes were rimmed with red, and her usually impeccable appearance showed signs of strain. "Kids," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've just gotten off the phone with Mr. Hawkins from the bank. He's confirmed the deficit." Diane's composure crumbled, and she sank into the nearest armchair, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Emma rushed to her mother's side, wrapping an arm around her. "Mom, it's okay. We'll figure this out together." Michael paced the room, his frustration palpable. "But how did this happen?" Dad was a respected accountant. He handled finances for half the businesses in town. "It doesn't make any sense." Sarah, always the practical one, began sorting through the papers on the table. According to these statements, the discrepancies started about 18 months ago. Small at first, but they grew exponentially over time. 18 months. Emma's brow furrowed. That's around the time Dad started working more hours. He said he was helping a new client with some complicated accounts. Diane looked up, wiping her eyes. "Jeffrey was so stressed during that time. He would come home late, barely eat. I thought it was just work pressure. But now I wonder." The room fell silent as the implications of their mother's words sank in. Had Jeffrey Thompson, the man they all looked up to, the cornerstone of their family and community, been involved in something illegal? Michael's voice cut through the tension. "No, I refuse to believe Dad would do anything dishonest. There has to be another explanation." Emma nodded, trying to inject some optimism into her voice. "Mike's right. We can't jump to conclusions. We need to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. There might be something we're missing." Sarah stood up, determination etched on her face. "I'll start going through Dad's home office. Maybe there's something there that can shed some light on this mess." As Sarah left the room, Diane spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. "There's something else you should know. This morning, I received a letter from Caldwell and Associates. They're threatening to sue the estate for gross negligence and fraud." The news hit the siblings like a physical blow. Caldwell and Associates was one of the largest real estate developers in the state and one of Jeffrey's most important clients. "Fraud!" Michael exploded. That's ridiculous. Dad would never. Mike, please, Emma interrupted, squeezing her mother's shoulder reassuringly. Getting angry won't solve anything. We need to approach this logically. First thing tomorrow, we'll contact Dad's lawyer and see what our options are. As the family grappled with the shocking revelations, none of them noticed the shadow that passed by the living room window, a figure moving swiftly across the front yard and disappearing into the gathering darkness. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, matching the mood in the Thompson household. Emma had barely slept, her mind racing with questions and worst-case scenarios. She made her way downstairs, the smell of coffee guiding her to the kitchen where she found Sarah already up, hunched over her laptop at the breakfast table. "Any luck?" Emma asked, pouring herself a cup of the strong brew. Sarah shook her head, frustration evident in her voice. "I've been through every file on Dad's computer. There's nothing out of the ordinary in his records. If anything, they're too perfect." Emma frowned, stirring her coffee absently. "Too perfect? What do you mean?" "I mean," Sarah explained, pushing her glasses up her nose, "everything balances to the penny. No discrepancies, no mistakes. Nothing. It's like looking at a textbook example of perfect bookkeeping." Before Emma could respond, Michael burst into the kitchen, his face flushed with excitement. "You guys need to see this," he said breathlessly, holding up an old, battered shoebox. "What is it?" Emma asked, setting down her coffee. Michael placed the box on the table, carefully removing the lid. "I couldn't sleep last night, so I started going through the attic. I found this hidden behind some old trunks." The sisters peered into the box. Inside was a collection of documents, handwritten notes, and what looked like a small notebook. Sarah reached in and pulled out one of the papers, her eyes widening as she scanned its contents. This is a letter from someone named Thomas Reeves. It's dated about 2 years ago." Emma leaned in to read over her sister's shoulder. The letter was brief but alarming. "Jeff, I know what you're doing. The numbers don't add up, and I can't keep quiet any longer. Meet me at the usual place tomorrow at noon. We need to talk about this before it's too late." "Tom." Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of their father. "Who's Thomas Reeves? Dad never mentioned him." Emma shook her head, her mind racing. "I don't know, but this letter, it sounds like he knew something was wrong long before we did." Sarah was already typing furiously on her laptop. "Thomas Reeves. Here. He was an accountant at Caldwell and Associates. Was past tense. He died in a car accident about 18 months ago." The siblings exchanged shocked looks as the implications sank in. The timing aligned perfectly with the start of the financial discrepancies they had discovered. "You don't think," Michael began, unable to finish the thought. Emma held up a hand, her face grim. "Let's not jump to conclusions. We need to go through everything in this box carefully." As they began to sift through the contents, a pattern emerged. Handwritten notes detailed discrepancies in various accounts, all linked to Caldwell and Associates. There were copies of emails, financial statements with sections highlighted, and what appeared to be a coded ledger. Sarah picked up the small notebook, flipping through its pages. "This is Dad's handwriting, but it's all in some kind of shorthand. I can't make sense of it." Just then, they heard the front door open and close. Diane's voice called out, "Kids, are you up? There's someone here to see us." The siblings exchanged worried glances. Emma quickly gathered the contents of the shoebox, stuffing them back inside. "We can't let anyone know about this yet," she whispered urgently. "Not until we understand what it all means." Michael nodded, taking the box from Emma. "I'll hide this back in the attic. You two go see who's here." As Michael slipped out of the kitchen, Emma and Sarah made their way to the living room. They found their mother standing with a tall, imposing man in an expensive suit. His steel-gray hair and sharp eyes gave him an air of authority that immediately put Emma on edge. Diane turned to her daughters, her face pale. "Girls, this is Mr. Caldwell, from Caldwell and Associates." Emma felt her heart rate spike. The man at the center of their father's mysterious financial troubles was standing in their living room, and judging by the grim set of his jaw, he wasn't there for a social call. Mr. Caldwell's piercing gaze swept over Emma and Sarah before he spoke, his voice deep and controlled. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm afraid I'm here on a matter of grave importance. We need to discuss the irregularities in your father's accounts and the money that's gone missing from my company." Emma felt her throat tighten as Mr. Caldwell's words hung in the air. She glanced at Sarah, who had gone pale, before turning back to address their unexpected visitor. "Mr. Caldwell," Emma began, her voice steadier than she felt, "we're still trying to make sense of all this ourselves. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting with our lawyer present to discuss." "I'm afraid this can't wait," Mr. Caldwell interrupted, his tone brusque. "Your father's actions have put my company in a precarious position. We're talking about millions of dollars unaccounted for, Ms. Thompson. Surely you understand the urgency of the situation." Diane stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, Mr. Caldwell, we're all in shock here. Jeffrey was a good man, a loving husband and father. There must be some mistake." Mr. Caldwell's expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained hard. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand this is difficult, but the fact remains that your husband's signature is on documents that show clear evidence of embezzlement and fraud. We've already involved the authorities." At that moment, Michael entered the room, freezing when he saw Mr. Caldwell. Emma noticed a flicker of something, recognition, fear, cross her brother's face before he composed himself. "What's going on here?" Michael demanded, moving to stand protectively next to their mother. Mr. Caldwell turned his attention to Michael. "Ah, you must be Jeffrey's son, Michael, isn't it? I believe we met at the company picnic last year." Michael nodded stiffly. "I remember, but that doesn't explain why you're here, in our home, making accusations about our father." "Not accusations, Mr. Thompson. Facts." Mr. Caldwell reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I have here copies of financial records spanning the last 2 years. They show a systematic siphoning of funds from various accounts managed by your father. The total amount missing is just over $2.3 million. Emma felt the room spin. The amount was staggering, far more than they had initially thought. She steadied herself against the back of a chair, her mind racing. Sarah, always quick to analyze, spoke up. "May we see those documents, Mr. Caldwell?" He hesitated for a moment before handing the folder to Sarah. "By all means, though I warn you, the evidence is quite clear." As Sarah began to flip through the papers, Emma noticed Michael shifting uncomfortably. There was something off about his behavior, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. "Mr. Caldwell," Emma said, trying to buy time, "even if these documents are authentic, how can you be sure our father was responsible? Couldn't someone else have access to these accounts?" Caldwell shook his head. "The transactions were all authorized using your father's personal codes and passwords, unless you're suggesting he shared those with someone else, which would be a breach of contract in itself. I don't see how anyone else could be responsible." Sarah looked up from the documents, her brow furrowed. "These are very thorough, but some of these transactions seem odd. Large round numbers, all transferred to the same offshore account." "Precisely," Caldwell nodded. "A clear attempt at money laundering. We've traced the account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, but the trail goes cold there." Emma's mind flashed to the shoebox hidden in the attic. Could there be a connection? She glanced at Michael, wondering if he was thinking the same thing. "What happens now?" Diane asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caldwell's expression hardened again. "Now, Mrs. Thompson, we try to recover as much of the stolen funds as possible. Your husband's estate will be thoroughly investigated. I'm sorry to say this, but you may lose everything, the house, any savings, retirement accounts. It's all potentially liable." The family stood in stunned silence, the weight of Caldwell's words sinking in. Everything they had, everything their father had worked for, could be gone. "We need time," Emma said finally, her voice firm. "Time to go through our father's records ourselves, to consult with a lawyer. Surely you can give us that much, Mr. Caldwell." Caldwell considered for a moment before nodding slowly. You have 48 hours. After that, I'm afraid the matter will be entirely in the hands of our lawyers and the authorities." He gathered his briefcase and moved towards the door. "I truly am sorry for your loss and for this unpleasantness. Jeffrey Thompson was always a man I respected. I never thought him capable of this." As the door closed behind Mr. Caldwell, the Thompson family stood in shocked silence. It was Michael who finally broke it. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. "There's something I need to tell you all. About Dad, and about what's really going on here." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever Michael was about to reveal, she had a feeling their lives were about to get a lot more complicated. The family gathered in the kitchen, the tension palpable as they waited for Michael to speak. He paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair, a nervous habit that reminded them all painfully of their father. "Michael, what's going on?" Emma finally asked, her patience wearing thin. "What do you know about all this?" He stopped pacing and leaned against the counter, his face a mask of guilt and worry. "About 6 months ago, Dad came to me. He was scared. Said he'd discovered something big at work, something illegal." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes wide. "What kind of illegal?" Michael took a deep breath. "Money laundering, on a massive scale. But it wasn't just Caldwell and Associates. Dad said it involved some of the biggest names in the state, politicians, judges, business leaders. He said he'd been gathering evidence, trying to figure out how deep it went." Emma felt her heart race. "Why didn't he go to the police?" "He was afraid," Michael replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Said he didn't know who he could trust. That's when he asked me to help him." Diane gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Michael, what did you do?" He looked at his mother, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I helped him set up secure communication channels, encrypted storage for his files. I even helped him create that offshore account Mr. Caldwell mentioned." "You what?" Emma exploded, jumping to her feet. "Michael, do you have any idea how bad this looks? You could be implicated in all of this." I know, Michael shot back, his voice rising. "But you have to understand, I was trying to protect Dad." He said he was close to exposing the whole operation. "That's why I've been so adamant about defending him. I know he wasn't the one behind this." Sarah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "The shoebox in the attic. That's part of Dad's evidence, isn't it?" Michael nodded. "Yes, but it's only a small part. There's more hidden away. Dad was paranoid about keeping it all in one place." Emma took a deep breath, trying to process this new information. "Okay, so if Dad was the good guy in all this, why is Caldwell pointing the finger at him? And where's the rest of the evidence?" "I don't know," Michael admitted. "Dad was supposed to meet me the day before the heart attack. He never showed up. I thought maybe he'd gotten cold feet, but now you think something happened to him?" Emma finished, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Diane, who had been silent throughout Michael's revelation, suddenly stood up. "There's something you all need to see," she said, her voice shaking. She left the room and returned a moment later with a small safe. "Your father gave me this years ago," she explained as she set it on the table. "Told me to open it only if something happened to him. I couldn't bring myself to do it until now." With trembling hands, Diane entered the combination. The safe clicked open, revealing a USB drive and a handwritten letter. Emma reached for the letter, recognizing her father's handwriting immediately. As she read aloud, the room fell silent. "My dear family, if you're reading this, then I fear the worst has happened. I've uncovered a conspiracy that goes far deeper than I ever imagined. The evidence on this drive will explain everything. But be careful. Trust no one outside our family. The people involved in this will stop at nothing to keep it hidden. I'm so sorry for the burden I'm placing on you. Know that everything I've done has been to protect you and to right a terrible wrong. I love you all more than words can say. Always, Dad." Emma looked up from the letter, her eyes meeting those of her siblings and mother. In that moment, She knew their lives had changed irrevocably. They were now in possession of dangerous information, being hunted by powerful people who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice small and scared. Emma straightened her shoulders, a determined look crossing her face. "We do what Dad would want us to do. We find the truth, clear his name, and bring the real criminals to justice." As the family nodded in agreement, none of them noticed the faint click of a camera lens from the tree outside their kitchen window. Someone was watching, waiting, and the clock was ticking. The soft glow of computer screens illuminated the Thompson living room, casting long shadows across the worried faces of Emma, Michael, and Sarah. It was well past midnight, but sleep was the furthest thing from their minds as they pored over the contents of the USB drive their father had left behind. "This is unbelievable," Sarah muttered, her eyes scanning rapidly across lines of code and financial data. Dad managed to trace transactions through at least a dozen shell companies. The amount of money being moved is staggering. Michael nodded grimly. "And look at these names. Senator Blackwood, Judge Harriman, even the chief of police. If this information gets out, it'll shake the entire state to its core." Emma leaned back, rubbing her tired eyes. No wonder Dad was so paranoid. He was sitting on a powder keg. She turned to Michael, her expression serious. "We need to know everything, Mike. No more secrets. What exactly did Dad ask you to do?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "He needed someone with tech skills. I set up encrypted communication channels, helped him access some protected servers. But I swear, I never knew the full extent of what he was investigating." Sarah looked up from her laptop. "Wait a second. These transactions, they all seem to funnel through one central account. But the account holder's name is encrypted. If we could crack that, we'd have our smoking gun." Just then, a floorboard creaked upstairs. The siblings froze, exchanging alarmed glances. They had sent their mother to bed hours ago, insisting she try to get some rest. "Did you hear that?" Emma whispered, slowly rising to her feet. Michael nodded, reaching for a heavy paperweight on the coffee table. "I'll check it out. You two stay here." As Michael crept towards the stairs, Emma and Sarah held their breath. Suddenly, a crash echoed from the second floor, followed by a muffled shout. "Mom!" Sarah cried, all caution forgotten as she bolted for the stairs, Emma close behind. They found Michael wrestling with a masked intruder in the hallway outside their mother's room. Diane stood in her doorway, clutching a table lamp like a weapon. Emma didn't hesitate. She launched herself at the intruder, catching them off guard. Together, she and Michael managed to pin the person to the ground. Sarah quickly grabbed a belt from a nearby laundry basket, using it to secure the intruder's hands. As Michael yanked off the mask, they all gasped. Staring back at them, his lip bleeding and eye already swelling, was Thomas Hawkins, their father's colleague from the bank. "Mr. Hawkins?" Diane exclaimed, lowering the lamp. "What on earth are you doing here?" Hawkins spat blood onto the carpet. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he growled. "Give me the drive and forget about all of this. It's your only chance." Emma's eyes narrowed. "Our only chance? Or yours? Start talking, Hawkins. Now." Over the next hour, as sirens wailed in the distance, a neighbor had called the police after hearing the commotion. Hawkins's story spilled out. He had been part of the money laundering scheme, a mid-level player responsible for cooking the books at the bank. When Jeffrey Thompson had started asking questions, Hawkins had been tasked with keeping him quiet. "I never wanted it to go this far," Hawkins insisted, his bravado crumbling. "They said they'd just scare him off, maybe frame him for a small embezzlement. But when they realized how much he knew, they killed him," Michael said flatly. "It wasn't a heart attack at all, was it?" Hawkins shook his head miserably. "Poison. Untraceable. They made me do it. Said they'd go after my family if I didn't." Emma felt a cold rage building inside her. "Who's they, Hawkins? Who's behind all this?" Before he could answer, the sound of screeching tires filled the air. Hawkins's eyes widened in terror. "They're here. You have to run. Now. Michael peered out the window, then turned to his family, his face pale. Black SUVs. No markings. This isn't the police. Emma made a split-second decision. Mom, take the USB and go out the back. Head to Aunt Linda's house. Don't stop for anything. She turned to her siblings. Sarah, go with her. Michael and I will hold them off and meet you there. As Diane and Sarah slipped out the back door, Emma and Michael dragged the still-bound Hawkins down to the basement. They could hear the front door splintering above them. There has to be another way out, Michael muttered, scanning the walls desperately. Emma's eyes landed on an old coal chute, long sealed up. There, she pointed. Help me with this. As they worked to pry open the rusted cover, heavy footsteps echoed above. Hawkins whimpered in fear. Who is it? Emma demanded, pausing in her efforts. Who's the one behind everything? Hawkins opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, a deafening crack split the air. The basement door flew off its hinges, and a cloud of tear gas billowed down the stairs. Go! Michael shouted, shoving Emma towards the now open coal chute. I'll be right behind you. Emma hesitated for a split second, then squeezed through the opening. The last thing she saw before darkness enveloped her was Michael, silhouetted against the gas-filled basement, reaching back to pull Hawkins towards their escape route. As Emma tumbled out onto the dew-covered grass of their backyard, coughing and disoriented, one thought pounded through her mind. This was far from over. The real fight to clear their father's name and expose the truth was just beginning. Emma's lungs burned as she sprinted through the pre-dawn streets of Millbrook, her footsteps echoing off silent houses. She dared not look back, the sounds of pursuit spurring her on. Michael had insisted she go ahead while he helped the injured Hawkins through the coal chute. Now she prayed they had made it out safely. As she rounded a corner, a hand shot out from a darkened alley, yanking her into the shadows. Emma's fist was already flying before she recognized her brother's face. Whoa, easy, Michael whispered, dodging the punch. It's me. Emma sagged against the alley wall, relief washing over her. Thank God. Where's Hawkins? Michael's expression darkened. He didn't make it. One of them caught up to us as we were coming out of the chute. Hawkins. He pushed me ahead and told me to run. I heard a gunshot just as I turned the corner. Emma closed her eyes, processing this new loss. Hawkins may have been involved in their father's death, but in the end, he had tried to help them. And now he was gone, taking whatever information he had to the grave. We need to move, Michael said urgently. Those guys won't stop until they find us. Any word from Mom and Sarah? Emma shook her head. Nothing yet, but if they're smart, they'll have ditched their phones. We should do the same. She pulled out her cell and hesitated for a moment before dropping it to the ground and crushing it under her heel. Michael followed suit, then gestured towards the end of the alley. There's a 24-hour diner a few blocks from here. We can regroup there, try to figure out our next move. As they made their way through the quiet streets, keeping to the shadows, Emma's mind raced. Mike, she whispered. Before everything went sideways, Sarah mentioned something about a central account, one that all the transactions seemed to flow through. Michael nodded. Yeah, I saw that too. The account holder's name was encrypted, but I bet if we could crack that, we'd have our mastermind. They fell silent as they approached the diner, its neon sign a beacon in the darkness. After carefully scanning the nearly empty parking lot, they slipped inside and took a booth in the back corner, positioning themselves to watch both the entrance and the kitchen doors. A tired-looking waitress approached, eyeing their disheveled appearance warily. Coffee, please, Emma nodded. As the waitress walked away, she leaned in close to Michael. We need a plan. We can't just keep running. Michael rubbed his temples, exhaustion etched on his face. I know, but without that USB drive, we've got nothing. No proof, no leverage. Maybe not nothing, Emma mused. You helped Dad set up those secure channels, right? Is there any way you could access them remotely? Maybe he left copies of the data somewhere else. Michael's eyes lit up. Maybe. There was a cloud server we used, heavily encrypted. If I could get to a computer with the right software. Their conversation was interrupted as the diner's door chimed. Both siblings tensed, but it was just an elderly couple entering for an early breakfast. Okay, Emma said, her voice low. First, we need to make sure Mom and Sarah are safe. Then we find a way to access that server. After that, she trailed off as she noticed Michael staring intently at something over her shoulder. What is it? She asked, resisting the urge to turn around. The TV, Michael whispered. Look. Emma shifted slightly, angling to see the small television mounted in the corner. Her heart nearly stopped as she saw their family home on the screen, surrounded by police cars and fire trucks. The caption below read, "Local family's home target of suspected arson attack. They're destroying the evidence," Michael growled. Anything we might have left behind. Emma felt a surge of anger, quickly followed by determination. Then we make sure their plan backfires. Mike, is there any way you can use this? Hack into the police database, maybe plant some of Dad's evidence. Michael considered for a moment, then slowly nodded. It's risky, but yeah, I think I could, if we can get our hands on a laptop and find a secure internet connection. Just then, Emma's burner phone, a cheap prepaid model she kept for emergencies, vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out cautiously, seeing a text from an unknown number. Motel 6, room 114. Come alone. Emma showed the message to Michael, who frowned. It could be Sarah, or it could be a trap. We don't have much choice, Emma sighed. We need to know if Mom and Sarah are safe. You work on getting access to that server. I'll check out the motel. Michael looked like he wanted to argue but finally nodded. Be careful. If anything feels off, you get out of there immediately. We'll meet back here in 3 hours. As they stood to leave, the waitress returned with their coffee. Everything okay, honey? She asked Emma, concern evident in her voice. You two look like you've had a rough night. Emma managed a weak smile. Just some family drama. Nothing we can't handle. If only that were true, she thought as they stepped back out into the slowly brightening morning. The real drama was just beginning, and Emma had a sinking feeling that before it was over, their family and their entire town would never be the same. The Motel 6 loomed before Emma, its faded paint and flickering neon sign a far cry from the cozy suburban life she'd known just days ago. She scanned the parking lot, noting the few cars scattered about, an old pickup truck, a minivan with out-of-state plates, and a nondescript sedan that could belong to anyone. Taking a deep breath, Emma made her way to room 114. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What if it wasn't Sarah on the other side? What if she was walking into a trap? Before she could decide, the door creaked open, revealing Sarah's tired face. Thank God, her sister breathed, pulling Emma inside and quickly shutting the door. The room was dim, curtains drawn tight. Emma's eyes adjusted to see her mother sitting on the edge of one of the twin beds, looking small and fragile. Mom! Emma rushed to her, enveloping her in a tight hug. Are you okay? What happened? Diane nodded weakly. We're fine, sweetheart. Just shaken. Sarah saw the news about the house. Those bastards, Sarah spat, pacing the small room. They're trying to destroy everything, aren't they? All of Dad's work, all the evidence. Emma held up a hand, her mind racing. Not everything. Michael thinks he can access some of Dad's files remotely, but we need to move fast. It won't take them long to figure out we weren't in the house. She quickly filled them in on what had happened with Hawkins, watching their faces pale as she described his final moments. So what's our next move? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Emma ran a hand through her hair, thinking, we need to get somewhere safe, somewhere with a secure internet connection. Michael's working on getting access to Dad's server, but she was cut off by a sharp knock at the door. Everyone froze. Room service, a muffled voice called out. Sarah frowned. We didn't order anything. Emma motioned for them to be quiet, creeping towards the door. She peered through the peephole, then stumbled back in shock. It's Mr. Caldwell, she whispered. Diane gasped. What's he doing here? How did he find us? Emma's mind raced. Caldwell was at the center of all this, or at least he seemed to be. But if he wanted them dead, why knock? Why not just break down the door? Making a split-second decision, Emma opened the door, positioning herself to block Caldwell's view of the room. Mr. Caldwell, she said coolly, this is unexpected. The older man looked haggard, his usually impeccable suit rumpled. Ms. Thompson, may I come in? It's not safe out here. Emma hesitated, then stepped aside. As Caldwell entered, she noticed him scanning the room, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Diane and Sarah. I'm glad you're all safe, he said, his voice low. I came to warn you. Things have escalated. Sarah stood, her posture defensive. Warn us? You're the one who started all this. The accusations against our father, the threats dash. I know. Caldwell held up his hands. And I'm sorry. I was misled, manipulated. But I've learned the truth, and I want to help make this right. Emma crossed her arms, skeptical. Why should we believe you? Caldwell reached into his jacket, causing everyone to tense. But he slowly pulled out a USB drive, identical to the one Jeffrey had left them. Because I have proof, he said. Your father, he wasn't alone in his investigation. I've been gathering evidence too, trying to find a way out of this mess. But they're on to me now. I don't have much time. Emma took the drive, turning it over in her hands. It could be a trap, a virus designed to destroy whatever was left of her father's work. But something in Caldwell's eyes, a mixture of fear and desperation, made her pause. Okay, she said finally. Talk. Over the next hour, Caldwell laid out a conspiracy far more extensive than they had imagined. Politicians, judges, business leaders, all involved in a massive money laundering operation that spans state lines and even international borders. Your father stumbled onto it by accident, Caldwell explained. A discrepancy in the books that most would have overlooked. But Jeffrey, he was too thorough, too honest. He started digging, and once he realized what he'd found, he couldn't let it go. So why frame him? Sarah demanded. Why not just? She couldn't bring herself to say it. Caldwell sighed heavily. Because they needed a scapegoat. Someone to take the fall if things went south. I'm ashamed to say I went along with it at first. But when I realized they were willing to kill to keep this quiet, a heavy silence fell over the room. Emma's mind was reeling, trying to process everything they'd learned. Suddenly, her burner phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Got it. Meet at the library. Hurry. Emma looked up at her family and Caldwell. We need to go. Now, Michael's found something. As they hurried out of the motel room, none of them noticed the black sedan pulling into the parking lot, its tinted windows hiding the occupants within. The pieces were finally coming together, but the most dangerous part of their journey was just beginning. With powerful enemies closing in and the truth tantalizingly close, the Thompson family was about to face their greatest challenge yet. The race to clear Jeffrey Thompson's name and expose the real criminals was reaching its climax, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The Millbrook Public Library stood as a beacon of normalcy in a world that had turned upside down for the Thompson family. As Emma, Sarah, Diane, and a visibly nervous Caldwell approached the building, they scanned the area for any sign of Michael or potential threats. There, Sarah whispered, nodding towards a figure hunched over a laptop in a far corner of the reading room. Michael looked up as they entered, relief washing over his face. Thank God, he breathed as they gathered around him. His eyes narrowed as he spotted Caldwell. What's he doing here? Emma quickly filled Michael in on Caldwell's revelation and the additional USB drive. Michael's expression shifted from suspicion to cautious hope. This could be exactly what we need, he said, turning back to his laptop. I've managed to access Dad's secure server, but there's one last layer of encryption I can't crack. I think it's the name of the account holder, the mastermind behind all of this. Caldwell leaned in, his voice low. Try Chimera. It's a code name I've heard whispered in meetings, always associated with the top of the operation. Michael's fingers flew over the keyboard. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, the screen filled with data, financial records, emails, photographs. "We're in," Michael breathed. As they pored over the information, a chilling picture emerged. The conspiracy was even more far-reaching than they had imagined, involving not just local officials but reaching into the highest levels of state government. "Look at this," Sarah pointed to a series of transactions. Millions funneled through shell companies, then reinvested in legitimate businesses. They've been using this money to buy up half the state. Emma's eyes widened as she recognized a name. Senator Blackwood. Dad always said he was as crooked as they come. Looks like he was right. Diane, who had been quiet until now, suddenly gasped. "That building," she said, pointing to a photograph. "I recognize it. Your father and I went to a charity gala there last year. It's owned by Judge Harriman," Caldwell finished grimly. "One of the most respected jurists in the state, and apparently a key player in this whole operation." Michael was frantically copying files onto a separate drive. "We need to get this information out now, before they can bury it." Just then, Emma's phone buzzed with a news alert. Her heart sank as she read it aloud. "Breaking: local family suspected in massive fraud scheme. Authorities seeking Thompson family for questioning." "They're trying to get ahead of the story," Caldwell said, his face pale. "Frame you before you can expose them." Emma felt a surge of determination. "Not if we can help it. Mike, can you upload all of this to a secure site? Something they can't easily take down." Michael nodded. "Already on it. But we need a way to get people to pay attention, to make sure this doesn't get buried in the news cycle." Sarah's eyes lit up. "I have an idea, but it's risky." As Sarah outlined her plan, Emma felt a mix of pride and fear. It was dangerous, potentially putting them all in the crosshairs. But it was also their best shot at clearing their father's name and bringing the real criminals to justice. "Okay," Emma said finally. "Let's do it." The next hour was a whirlwind of activity. Michael worked feverishly to upload the data to multiple secure servers. Sarah, using her skills as a journalist, crafted a compelling narrative tying all the pieces together. Caldwell made discreet calls to contacts he still trusted in the media and law enforcement. And Emma prepared herself for the most difficult part of the plan. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the library, Emma stood before a hastily assembled press conference outside the Millbrook police station. Cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions as she stepped up to the microphones. "My name is Emma Thompson," she began, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "And I'm here to tell you the truth about my father, Jeffrey Thompson, and the real criminals who have been stealing from the people of this state for years." As Emma spoke, laying out the evidence they had uncovered, she could see the shock and disbelief spreading through the crowd. Behind her, Sarah and Michael worked to distribute the hard evidence to key reporters and law enforcement officials. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the back of the crowd. Emma's heart leapt into her throat as she saw Senator Blackwood pushing his way forward, his face contorted with rage. "This is preposterous," he shouted. "These are nothing but the desperate lies of a family trying to cover up their own crimes." But as he reached the front of the crowd, a hand fell on his shoulder. Emma recognized the grim-faced man as Agent Carson from the FBI's white-collar crime division, one of the contacts Caldwell had reached out to. "Senator Blackwood," Agent Carson said loudly enough for the cameras to pick up, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. We have some questions about your financial dealings." As Blackwood was led away, sputtering protests, Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. There would be trials, investigations, and likely threats to their safety for years to come. But in that moment, as she looked out at the sea of shocked faces and flashing cameras, Emma knew they had done it. They had cleared their father's name and set in motion a chain of events that would expose the truth. As the press conference wound down and the family regrouped, hugging each other tightly, Emma's thoughts turned to her father. She hoped, wherever he was, he could see what they had accomplished. They had finished what he started, bringing light to the shadows that had threatened to consume their lives. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but together, the Thompson family had proven they could face anything. They had uncovered a conspiracy, cleared their father's name, and in doing so had become the heroes of their own story. As they walked away from the police station, arm in arm, Emma knew that whatever came next, they would face it as a family, stronger and more united than ever before. Thank you for listening until the end. Share your opinion about the story in the comments and let us know which character you liked the most. If this story touched you and you want to hear more, click on the next story appearing on your screen. Leave a like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a great community of people who share emotional stories together. Until the next story.